Rain pressed against the glass doors of Harbor General like a warning no one wanted to read. Midnight in Lower Manhattan always smelled the same: wet asphalt, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Inside the emergency department, fluorescent lights hummed, while stretchers lined the hallway, victims of a system that was always one patient short of collapse. Claire Whitmore clocked in without a word. At 41, she moved slower than the younger nurses, but steadier than all of them. Her navy scrubs were faded at the seams, her shoes worn down at the heel. She poured herself burnt coffee from a stained machine and took a sip without flinching. 12-hour night shift. Again. She had been asked to cover last minute. Again. No one thanked her. At the nurses' station, a supervisor reminded her, quietly but sharply, that administration wanted low-profile behavior tonight. No incidents, no mistakes, no headlines. Claire nodded, eyes down, like she always did. She had learned long ago that being invisible was safer. A trauma alarm sounded, then another. Ambulances backed up, a coughing child, a homeless man bleeding from the head, a woman clutching her chest, gasping for air. The waiting room overflowed, tempers flared, and phones rang unanswered. Claire moved between beds, adjusting IVs, murmuring calm words, pressing gauze where it mattered most. Still, no one looked at her. At 12:47 a.m., the front desk screamed. It wasn't the panicked scream of pain. It was sharp, animal, final. A man stormed through the sliding doors, rain dripping from his jacket, eyes wild, hands shaking as he raised a handgun into the air. The sound of it cocking silenced the room faster than any siren ever could. "Everybody get down!" he shouted. People dropped. A mother shielded her child. A doctor froze mid-step. Security reached for radios they wouldn't get to use. The man's finger tightened on the trigger as fear surged like electricity through the room. Claire did not move. She stood between the gunman and the double doors marked ICU, one hand resting lightly on the wall, her posture calm, almost tired. She had seen this kind of chaos before. Different country, different uniforms, same fear. The gunman noticed her. His eyes locked onto hers, confused, angry, almost offended. "Get down!" he yelled at her. Claire didn't raise her hands. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. Instead, she spoke quietly, her voice steady enough to cut through the panic. "If you fire that," she said, "someone in there will die who has nothing to do with your pain." The words landed harder than the gunshot everyone expected, but never came. The man hesitated. Around them, the emergency room held its breath. For 3 seconds, no one breathed. The gunman's arm shook as if his body had finally realized what his mind had already decided to do. His eyes darted across the emergency room, taking in the bodies on the floor, the crying, the smell of antiseptic and fear. This wasn't the place he had imagined. It was smaller, messier, too real. "Don't talk to me," he snapped at Claire. "You don't know anything." She nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "You're right," she said. "I don't know you, but I know what this room turns into when someone panics." Behind her, a cardiac monitor began to beep faster. A patient in ICU was crashing. Claire could hear it. She always heard the machines before anyone else did. Security tried to flank the man. He noticed immediately. "I said, get down," he shouted, swinging the gun toward a nurse who hadn't moved fast enough. She screamed and collapsed to the floor. That was when Claire stepped forward. Just one step. It was enough. The gunman's eyes snapped back to her, burning with disbelief. "I told you to get on the ground." "If you shoot," Claire said, "you won't get what you came for." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried because it didn't shake. He laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "You think I care?" "Yes," she replied. "I think you care too much." That landed wrong. His jaw tightened. His grip faltered. Police sirens wailed outside now, distant but closing in. Red and blue lights flickered through the glass doors, washing the room in frantic color. The gunman glanced toward them, then back at Claire. "They never listen," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I begged them." Claire didn't interrupt. "They said my son wasn't critical enough," he continued. "They said to wait, to fill out forms." A sob escaped him before he could stop it. He wiped his face angrily like he was ashamed of the weakness. Claire shifted her weight slightly, positioning herself between him and the ICU doors without making it obvious. A habit, an old one. "What's your son's name?" she asked. The question hit him harder than shouting ever could have. He stared at her, suspicion flashing across his face. "Why would I tell you that?" "Because," Claire said, eyes steady, "saying his name out loud reminds you why you're still standing." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a hoarse whisper, "Meant only for her," he answered. The gun dipped an inch, and in that tiny movement something dangerous and irreversible began to shift. The room was quiet in the way only terror could create. People lay frozen on the floor, afraid even to breathe too loudly. The gunman's chest rose and fell fast like he was running without moving. His eyes never left Claire now. Everyone else had disappeared from his world. "You think you're special," he said, voice low and sharp. "You think standing there makes you brave?" Claire shook her head slightly. "No," she answered. "It just means I've learned what happens when no one steps forward." She could feel the weight of the moment pressing into her shoulders. One wrong word, one sudden movement. She kept her hands visible, her stance open, her voice slow, not calm like a professional. Calm like someone who had survived worse. The man laughed again, but this time it broke halfway through. "You're not scared enough," he said. "That's what bothers me." "I am scared," Claire replied. "I just don't let fear decide for me anymore." Behind the front desk, a phone vibrated endlessly, unanswered. A child whimpered somewhere near the waiting room chairs. The smell of blood mixed with antiseptic grew stronger as a trauma patient bled quietly, unnoticed by everyone except Claire. She glanced back for half a second, then returned her eyes to the gunman. "That man back there," she said, nodding toward the ICU doors. "His heart rate is climbing. If you fire even into the ceiling, he could die from shock alone." The gunman frowned. "You a doctor now?" "No," Claire said. "I'm a nurse who works nights. We see what everyone else misses." That did it. Something in his expression shifted. Not anger, recognition. "You don't talk like them," he said, "like the cops. Like the administrators." Claire let a beat pass. "Because I'm not here to control you," she said. "I'm here to keep people alive, including you." He swallowed hard. His finger flexed on the trigger. Outside, a loudspeaker crackled as police tried to establish contact. The sound echoed through the glass doors, distorted and aggressive. The gunman flinched, instinctively turning his head. Claire took that moment. "Don't answer them yet," she said quietly. "They don't know you, I do." That made him snap back toward her. "You don't know a damn thing about me." She met his gaze without blinking. "You didn't come here to kill strangers," she said. "You came because no one listened when you begged." The words hit him like a punch. His jaw tightened. His eyes shone. For the first time since entering the hospital, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Say that again." And Claire knew she was closer to the truth than anyone else in the room dared to be. The gunman's breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed wild. "Say it again," he demanded, voice shaking. "Say what you just said." Claire didn't rush. She knew better than that. Silence could be a tool if you held it long enough. She let the moment stretch, long enough for the room to remember it was still alive, long enough for the fear to settle instead of explode. "You begged," she said at last. "You begged people with clean shoes and empty eyes, and they told you to wait." His lips parted slightly. The gun dipped, just enough to notice. "You don't know that," he said, but the anger was thinner now, stretched over something raw. Claire took a slow breath. "I do," she replied, "because I've stood where you're standing, not with a gun, but with blood on my hands and someone dying while paperwork mattered more than time." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone behind a gurney started to cry quietly. Security stayed frozen, afraid to break whatever fragile balance had formed. The gunman swallowed hard. "They said he wasn't critical," he muttered. "Said kids bounce back." Claire's chest tightened, but her face didn't change. "And he didn't," she said gently. The words were a risk. She knew it. But truth, when spoken right, could disarm faster than force. His shoulders sagged. For a second, he looked smaller, older. "My boy," he whispered. "He hated hospitals." Claire nodded. "Most kids do." The gunman frowned. He used to cover his ears when the machines beeped. That was it. Claire's voice dropped, low enough that only he could hear. "Evan," she said, "your son's name was Noah." The effect was immediate. Evan staggered back half a step as if she had struck him. His face drained of color. The gun slipped lower, hanging uselessly between them. "How do you know that?" he demanded. "I never said his name." Claire held his gaze. "Because Noah was here before," she said. "Not tonight. Weeks ago. Room 3, third bed from the window." Evan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I changed his IV," Claire continued. "I sat with him when the monitors scared him. I promised him someone would listen." His knees buckled. He caught himself on the front desk, sobbing now, the sound ugly and uncontrollable. "You were there?" he choked. "You saw him?" "Yes," Claire said softly. "And I'm still here." Around them, the emergency room exhaled for the first time in minutes. The gun trembled in Evan's hand, and then slowly, impossibly, it lowered. For a moment, it felt like the danger had passed. Evan Cross leaned against the front desk, shoulders shaking, the gun hanging low in his hand. The emergency room stayed frozen, afraid that even hope might be too loud. Claire didn't move closer. She didn't reach for the weapon. She knew better. This was the fragile middle ground where people were most likely to break. "You stayed," Evan said hoarsely. "Everyone else walked past him. You stayed." Claire nodded. "That was my job." "No," he said, lifting his head. "That was a choice." Before she could answer, a voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Attention, this is NYPD. Sir, place the weapon on the ground and step away slowly. You're surrounded." Evan flinched hard, the spell breaking. His grip tightened again. Claire turned her head slightly, just enough to see the reflection in the glass doors. Police, tactical vests, weapons raised, fingers tense. And then she saw something else. 2 officers stood off to the side, whispering urgently to a man in a dark suit who didn't belong there. No badge on display, no visible weapon, just authority. Claire recognized that posture instantly. The man glanced toward her, eyes cold and assessing, then spoke quietly into a headset. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the reaction. One of the officers stiffened, nodded. Evan noticed it too. "What's happening?" he asked, panic creeping back into his voice. Claire didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Behind the glass, the suited man gestured subtly in her direction. Evan followed his gaze. "Why is he pointing at you?" Claire exhaled slowly. "Because when this ends," she said, choosing each word carefully, "they plan to take me too." Evan stared at her. "What?" "They'll say I interfered," she continued, "that I escalated the situation, that my background makes me a liability. That's insane," he snapped. "You stopped me." She met his eyes. "That doesn't always matter." The loudspeaker crackled again, louder this time, more forceful. "Last warning, put the gun down now." Evan's breathing quickened. His eyes darted between the police, the suited man, and Claire. "They're using you," he said suddenly. "They'll throw you away like they did him, like they did my son." Claire didn't deny it. Outside, lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the entire room in harsh white light. In that flash, Evan made a decision. Instead of lowering the gun further, he turned his body slightly, angling himself not toward Claire, not toward the officers, but toward the dark glass of the observation window. The suited man stiffened. Evan's voice rose, sharp with fury and clarity. "You don't get to erase her," he shouted. "Not after what you did." And in that moment, Claire realized the danger wasn't over. It had only changed direction. Evan's gun was no longer aimed at Claire. It was angled toward the glass wall that separated the emergency room from the observation corridor, where silhouettes shifted uneasily behind reflections. The suited man Evan had shouted at was gone now, swallowed by movement and darkness. But the damage was done. Trust had cracked. Control was slipping. "Everyone lies," Evan said, voice raw. They smile, they nod, and then they decide who's disposable. A woman near the vending machine sobbed softly. She was visibly pregnant, one hand braced against her lower back as she struggled to stay upright. Her fear was different, quieter, more desperate. Evan's eyes found her. "You," he said suddenly, pointing the gun. "Come here." The room erupted in gasps. "No," Claire said immediately, sharper than before. Evan ignored her. "I need leverage," he snapped. "Something they won't ignore." The pregnant woman froze, tears streaming down her face. She took one step forward, then another, shaking so badly she nearly fell. Claire moved before anyone else could. "I'll take her place," she said. Every head snapped toward her. Evan frowned. "What?" "I'll take her place," Claire repeated, stepping forward into the open space between them. "She hasn't done anything, I have." "That's not how this works," he said, confused. "It can be," Claire replied. "You said they erase people. I'm already on their list." Behind her, someone whispered her name. She didn't turn around. The police shouted commands through the loudspeaker, overlapping, panicked. Claire tuned them out. She focused on Evan's hands, the tremor in his fingers, the way his breathing spiked whenever he felt cornered. "You don't need her," Claire continued. "You already have me." Evan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're not afraid to die?" Claire swallowed. "I'm afraid every day. That's not the same thing." Silence stretched. The pregnant woman sobbed harder, covering her face. Slowly, Evan lowered the gun from her and aimed it at Claire's chest instead. "Move," he said. Claire obeyed. She stepped closer until the barrel was inches from her scrubs, close enough that she could smell the oil on the metal. Her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady at her sides. "There," Evan said. "Now they have to listen." Claire met his eyes. They should have listened a long time ago. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, deep and unrelenting. The bargain made no sense. It shouldn't have worked. But Evan didn't pull the trigger, and the woman he released collapsed to the floor, alive. The gun hovered inches from Claire's chest. She could feel the cold intention behind it, not hatred, not rage. Something worse, desperation. The kind that had already crossed every line and found no relief on the other side. Evan's voice dropped. "Say something," he demanded. "Give me one reason I shouldn't end this right now." Claire didn't answer immediately. She listened instead, to the uneven rhythm of his breathing, to the distant wail of sirens, to the faint, irregular beep of a monitor behind the ICU doors that told her someone was slipping away, second by second. Then she spoke. "I failed once," she said. The words surprised him. They surprised the room. Evan frowned. "What?" "I failed someone who needed me," Claire continued. "I did everything right, followed every protocol, moved as fast as I could, and it still wasn't enough." His grip tightened. "You're lying." "No," she said quietly. "I live with it." Her voice didn't crack. That was what made it believable. "There was a child," she went on. "Different place, different night. Same look in the eyes. Someone waiting for an adult to fix what the world broke." Evan swallowed. "Did they die?" "Yes." The word hung heavy between them. Claire didn't look away. "I replay it every time I close my eyes, every choice, every second I might have stolen back. That's what real punishment feels like." Evan's jaw trembled. "Then why are you still standing?" Claire exhaled slowly. "Because stopping doesn't bring them back, and hurting strangers doesn't either." The gun wavered. Around them, the emergency room remained unnaturally still, as if everyone sensed this was the moment that mattered most. A nurse pressed her face into the floor, praying silently. A doctor clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. "You think I wanted this?" Evan whispered. "You think I wanted to be this person?" "No," Claire said. "I think you wanted someone to admit they were wrong." His eyes burned. "They never did." Claire nodded once. "Then let me be the first." Evan blinked. "For what?" "For not saving him," she said. "For a system that taught you shouting was the only way to be heard." Something in Evan's face collapsed. A sound escaped his throat, half laugh, half sob as his shoulders shook. The gun dipped lower, his arm trembling from the weight of it all. Claire took a careful step closer, not to take the weapon, just close enough to show she wasn't leaving. The moment Evan's arm dropped lower, the room seemed to breathe again. It didn't last. A new voice cut through the tension, amplified and cold. "This is command. We are terminating negotiations. Officers are authorized to neutralize the suspect immediately." Claire felt it before she heard it. The shift. The air changed. The careful patience she had built with Evan fractured under the weight of authority. Evan stiffened. "What did they say?" Claire didn't lie. "They're done talking." Outside the glass doors, movement accelerated. Boots scraped, rifles lifted. The red dots of laser sights flickered briefly against white walls, then vanished as angles were adjusted. Evan's breathing spiked. "They're going to kill me." "They don't want chaos," Claire said carefully. "They want control." "That's not the same thing," he snapped. A man in a dark suit stepped into view behind the officers. No uniform, no visible weapon. He spoke quietly to the team leader, his posture relaxed, almost bored. When his eyes lifted, they locked onto Claire, not Evan. Claire's stomach tightened. The man raised a hand and made a short, decisive gesture. The team leader nodded. Evan noticed. "Why is he looking at you?" Claire hesitated for half a second too long. "Because," she said, "I complicate the ending." Another voice came through the loudspeaker, sharper now. "Claire Whitmore, step away from the suspect immediately." The sound of her name echoed through the emergency room. Every head turned. Evan stared at her. "They know you." "Yes." "Why?" She swallowed. "Because I don't fit their report." The suited man leaned in and spoke again. This time, Claire could hear fragments through the glass. "Prior service, sealed record, media exposure, unacceptable risk." Evan shook his head slowly. "They're blaming you." "They're preparing to," Claire replied. A police officer shouted from behind cover. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Step back now." Claire didn't move. Evan laughed suddenly, bitter and sharp. "So this is how it works," he said. "You save lives and they line you up with the rest of us." Claire met his eyes. "I told you they erase people." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the suited man's face for a split second. Calm, confident, already finished with the story. Evan's grip tightened again. The gun began to rise. And Claire realized the greatest threat wasn't the man holding the weapon. It was the order that had just been given. The command to fire still echoed in Evan's ears. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. Instead, something inside him went frighteningly quiet, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm changes direction. "They've already decided," Evan said, his voice flat. "Haven't they?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was written all over the room, in the tense shoulders of the officers, in the way no one was looking at Evan anymore. Their attention had shifted. The ending was being rewritten without him. Evan laughed once, short and hollow. "So this was never about me," he said. "I was just the mess they needed to clean up." The gun was still raised, but not where it had been before. Slowly, deliberately, Evan rotated his wrist. The barrel turned away from Claire, away from the officers, away from the screaming exits and terrified patients. It pointed instead at the glass wall of the observation corridor, at the place where the man in the dark suit stood half hidden behind reflections and authority. Claire's breath caught. "Evan!" "No," he said, sharper now. "You told me the truth. It's my turn." Behind the glass, the suited man froze. For the first time since he'd arrived, he looked uncertain. "You!" Evan shouted, voice cracking through the room. "You think you're invisible. You think paperwork makes blood disappear." The officers shouted commands, overlapping, panicked now. "Sir, lower the weapon. Lower it now." Evan ignored them. "My son didn't die because of me," he continued. "He didn't die because of her." He nodded once toward Claire without looking at her. "He died because someone decided saving him cost too much." The suited man stepped back instinctively. Evan saw it. A grim smile twisted across his face. "There it is," he said. "That look. That's the first honest thing I've seen all night." Claire took a careful step forward. "Evan, listen to me." "I am," he replied. "That's the problem. I finally am." The gun shook, but it didn't fire. "You made a choice," Evan shouted at the glass. "You signed a name, you checked a box, and my kid stopped breathing." Silence slammed into the room. Then Evan spoke one final sentence, loud and clear. "Richard Halden." The name hit like a drop tray in a quiet hallway. Behind the glass, the man's face went pale. Claire felt it instantly. The story had just changed. The name lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Richard Halden. Even the officers seemed to hesitate, their movement stalling as if a rule had been broken by simply saying it out loud. The suited man behind the glass didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed everything Evan had just accused him of. Evan's voice dropped, stripped of fury, and left with something colder. "They told me Noah was stable," he said. "They said we'd go home in the morning." Claire felt her chest tighten. She remembered that night now. Not clearly at first, but in fragments. A small hand gripping her finger. A boy trying not to cry because his father looked scared enough for both of them. "They discharged him early," Evan continued. "Said observation wasn't covered. Said to come back if it got worse." His laugh cracked. "It got worse in our living room." The room stayed silent. No one told him to stop. No one dared. "They say he died once," Evan went on, lifting his eyes toward the glass. "But he died twice. First when they sent him home to save money. Second when they buried the truth." Claire finally spoke. "I filed a report," she said quietly. Evan turned to her. "What?" "I flagged the discharge," she continued. "I wrote that Noah wasn't ready, that his oxygen levels were unstable. The report disappeared." Evan stared at her, stunned. "They erased it." "They reclassified it," Claire said. "Administrative error. That's what they call it when paperwork kills someone." Behind the glass, Halden shifted, his jaw tightening. "I saw this before," Claire added, her voice steady but heavy. "Different place, different uniforms. Children moved too early because resources were needed elsewhere." "I spoke up then too." Evan's eyes narrowed. "And what happened to you?" "They buried my complaint," she said. "Then they buried my career." A murmur rippled through the room. A doctor's hand covered her mouth. A nurse began to cry openly now. "So that's it," Evan said slowly. "He didn't just kill my son. He trained you to stay quiet." Claire shook her head. "No, he taught me what silence costs." Evan looked at the gun in his hand, then back at Halden's reflection. "You took my kid," he said, "and you made her watch it happen twice." The gun lowered slightly. The truth had finally been spoken, and it was heavier than any bullet. Evan stared at the gun in his hand like he'd forgotten how it got there. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him all at once. "So that's it," he said quietly. "They take everything, and they keep walking." Behind the glass, Richard Halden turned slightly, whispering urgently into his headset. Officers shifted positions, fingers tightened on triggers. The balance Claire had been holding together with words alone began to fracture. Evan noticed the movement. "They're not here for the truth," he said. "They're here to end this." Claire took a slow step forward. "Evan," she said, careful, deliberate. "Look at me." He didn't at first. His gaze dropped to the floor, to the reflection of the fluorescent lights in the polished tile. "I can't go back," he whispered. "They'll bury me like they buried him." "You don't have to decide everything tonight," Claire said. "You just have to stay alive long enough to be heard." Evan laughed weakly. "You still think they'll listen?" "I think," she replied, "that living scares them more than dying." The gun shook violently now. His breathing turned erratic, shallow. Claire recognized the signs instantly. Dissociation, collapse. The moment when people did something irreversible just to make the noise stop. Evan lifted the gun again, not toward the glass, not toward the officers, toward himself. "No," Claire said sharply, the first command she'd used all night. He flinched. "Don't do this," she continued. "This is what they expect. This is how they win." "They already won," he said. "My son's gone." Claire moved fast, not running, not lunging. She closed the distance in 2 controlled steps, her hands coming up to frame his wrist and forearm with practiced precision. Her grip wasn't forceful. It was exact. A technique learned in places where panic killed faster than bullets. "Breathe," she ordered. "With me. Now." Evan gasped, startled by the contact. "In," she said. "Out." The gun slipped from alignment, clattering to the floor between them. A shot rang out anyway. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. People screamed. Claire felt a sharp, burning impact rip across her shoulder as she twisted, instinctively placing her body between Evan and the room behind him. She hit the ground hard. Evan shouted her name. Blood spread across her scrubs, dark and fast. But the gun on the floor had never fired. Someone else had. And for the first time, everyone understood the danger had never been Evan alone. The scream that followed the gunshot echoed through the emergency room like shattered glass. Claire lay on the floor, one hand pressed to her shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. The pain was sharp but distant, pushed aside by instinct. She turned her head first, not to herself, but to Evan. "Stay down," she said through clenched teeth. Evan dropped to his knees beside her, hands shaking. "They shot you," he said, panic flooding his voice. "They shot you." "It wasn't them," Claire replied. Her eyes tracked the direction of the sound. "Not the police." Chaos erupted. Patients cried out. Officers scrambled for cover. Someone shouted for a medic, then realized where they were and shouted it anyway. Through the confusion, a man stepped forward from the side hallway. He wore hospital security scrubs, a badge clipped neatly to his chest. Calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that didn't belong in a room full of blood and fear. Claire saw him clearly now. He held a handgun fitted with a suppressor. "Everyone stay where you are," the man said evenly. "This situation is being contained." Evan stared at him in disbelief. "You're not security." The man's lips curved into a thin smile. "No," he said. "I'm cleanup." Behind the glass, Richard Halden had vanished. The realization hit Evan like a blow. "He sent you." The man didn't deny it. Mr. Halden prefers solutions that don't involve testimony. He raised the gun again, this time aiming directly at Evan. Claire moved without thinking. She rolled onto her side, ignoring the pain tearing through her shoulder, and shoved Evan backward with everything she had. The shot fired where Evan's head had been a second earlier, shattering a monitor instead. Glass rained down. "Claire!" Evan shouted. She gasped, vision blurring, but forced herself upright against the front desk. "You're proving him right," she said to the man. "You kill witnesses. That's all you know how to do." The man's eyes flicked to her wound. "You should have stayed quiet." Police shouted commands from every direction now, guns raised, voices overlapping. Red dots appeared on the man's chest. He hesitated. Just for a second. It was enough. Officers surged forward. The man spun, firing wildly as he retreated toward the corridor. A final shot rang out, then he disappeared into the smoke of alarms and sprinklers bursting overhead. The hospital plunged into emergency lockdown, and lying on the floor, bleeding but conscious, Claire realized the truth was finally too big to bury. The lockdown alarms wailed through the hospital, sealing doors with heavy mechanical thuds. Red lights flashed above every exit. Harbor General had become a cage. Claire lay on a gurney now, blood-soaked scrubs cut away, pressure packed tight against her shoulder. A young resident worked with shaking hands, trying not to look her in the eye. Claire focused on breathing. In, out. Pain could wait. "Don't sedate her yet," a familiar voice said. Claire turned her head slightly. Dr. Helen Royce stood at the foot of the gurney, face pale, jaw tight. The woman who had written Claire up for non-compliance. The woman who had once called her a liability. "She needs imaging," the resident protested. "She needs answers," Helen replied. "And so do we." Claire was wheeled down a dim hallway, past rooms where patients huddled in fear. They stopped in front of a door marked 312. Inside, an elderly man lay propped against pillows, oxygen hissing softly at his side. His eyes were sharp despite his age, tracking everything. He looked at Claire and slowly removed the mask. "You finally got shot," he said calmly. Claire gave a weak breath of a laugh. "Took long enough." The resident froze. "You know her?" The man ignored him. His gaze never left Claire's face. "I wondered how long it would take before they forced your hand." Claire swallowed. "You shouldn't be sitting up, Mr. Whitaker." Walter Whitaker smiled faintly. "Still giving orders." Helen stared between them. "What is this?" Whitaker shifted, wincing slightly. "I'm the man who signed the disciplinary action against Nurse Claire Whitmore 8 years ago." The room went silent. "I buried her report," he continued, "not because it was wrong, because it threatened people with more power than me." Claire closed her eyes for a second. The memory hit hard. The meeting, the smiles, the polite destruction. "I told myself it was procedure," Whitaker said. "I told myself she'd land on her feet." Helen's voice trembled. "You destroyed her career." Whitaker nodded. "Yes." He looked back at Claire. "I was wrong." The words landed heavier than any apology. "You knew about Halden," Claire said quietly. "I suspected," he admitted. "Tonight confirmed it." Sirens echoed faintly outside as federal units swarmed the building. Whitaker reached for Claire's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "They won't be able to silence this anymore," he said. "Not with witnesses alive." Claire met his gaze. "Then don't waste it." He nodded once. And for the first time, the truth had an ally inside the system. The room outside 312 filled with voices, urgent, clipped, layered with authority. Federal agents arrived in waves, badges flashing under harsh lights. Laptops opened, phones rang. The hospital felt less like a place of healing and more like a crime scene finally being taken seriously. Claire sat upright on the gurney now, her shoulder bandaged tight. Pain pulsed with every heartbeat, but her mind was clear. Too clear. She watched as 2 agents approached, one older, one young enough to still look nervous. "Nurse Whitmore," the older agent said. "We need to ask you about your prior service." Claire nodded. "I figured." They wheeled her into a small consultation room, a single table, 2 chairs, no windows. It felt familiar in a way she didn't like. The agent placed a thin folder on the table. No markings, no logos, just her name. "You were an Army combat medic," he said, "then seconded to a federal medical support unit. Your records end abruptly." "They didn't end," Claire replied. "They were sealed." The younger agent shifted uncomfortably. "Why?" Claire looked at the folder. "Because I reported something I wasn't supposed to see." The older agent opened it. Inside were scanned reports, redacted lines, dates that jumped years without explanation. "You documented forced early discharges in a conflict zone," he said. "Children transferred out to free resources. Several died within days." "And the justification?" Claire asked. Cost, he answered quietly. Claire nodded. Same word, different country. The agent's jaw tightened. You named a contractor. Yes, she said, a private firm handling medical logistics. Their insurance partner was Halden Group. Silence settled over the room. So, when you filed your report, the agent continued, your unit was dissolved. Your evaluation labeled you unstable. You were transferred out. They called it burnout, Claire said. They always do. Outside, a door slammed. Raised voices. Someone shouted Halden's name again. The younger agent looked at her, eyes wide. You've been carrying this for years. I tried to forget, Claire said. But then Noah came in. Same symptoms, same pressure to move him out. I knew the pattern. The older agent closed the folder slowly. Your report didn't disappear, he said. It was rerouted. Tonight, Mr. Whitaker released the hold. Claire exhaled for the first time in hours. So it's on record, she said. Yes, he replied, and this time it won't be buried. Claire leaned back, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Good, she said, because I'm tired of being quiet. By dawn, the hospital no longer belonged to doctors or patients. It belonged to evidence. Federal agents sealed off entire wings with yellow tape. Phones were confiscated. Security footage was pulled from servers that had suddenly stopped malfunctioning. Names that once carried weight were now spoken carefully, like explosives. Richard Halden arrived just after sunrise, not in handcuffs, not running. He walked through the side entrance surrounded by attorneys, wearing a tailored coat and the expression of a man accustomed to being untouchable. He smiled politely at the chaos, as if inconvenienced rather than implicated, until he saw Claire. She sat in a wheelchair near the nurse's station, shoulder wrapped in white bandages, her face pale but steady. Two agents stood nearby, not guarding her, listening to her. Halden's smile faltered. For the first time, his eyes didn't slide past her. You, he said softly, as if tasting something bitter. This was unnecessary. Claire met his gaze. So were the shortcuts. Halden turned to the agents. This woman is confused, he said smoothly. She's been emotionally compromised. You'll find her testimony unreliable. The older agent stepped forward. We already found your signature on 14 expedited discharge authorizations, including Noah Cross. Halden stiffened. That's standard procedure. No, the agent replied. It's negligent homicide. The words landed hard. Halden's lawyers moved at once, voices rising, objections flying. But it didn't matter. Screens lit up around the station, footage playing on loop, emails, internal memos, risk assessments that put profit above survival. Whitaker was wheeled in, oxygen tank rattling softly. I released everything, he said calmly, including the orders you buried. Halden turned sharply. You had no authority. I remembered I did, Whitaker replied. Sirens sounded again outside, this time not approaching, but waiting. An agent stepped up behind Halden. Richard Halden, you are being detained pending charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and manslaughter. The cuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed. Halden's composure cracked. You think this ends with me? He snapped. There's an entire system behind this. Claire spoke quietly. Systems don't bleed, she said. People do. As Halden was led away, cameras flashed through the glass doors. His name would be everywhere by noon. Claire closed her eyes, exhaustion finally settling in. For the first time, the man who had caused so much silent damage was no longer protected by silence. And the fall felt long overdue. The applause never came. There were no cameras pointed at Claire when the sun fully rose over lower Manhattan, no reporters asking how it felt to be brave. By mid-morning, the hospital was quiet again in the way only exhaustion could create. The chaos had been cleaned, the blood scrubbed from the floors, the broken glass replaced. It was as if the night had never happened, except it had. Claire sat alone in a small administrative office, her shoulder aching beneath fresh bandages. A paper cup of lukewarm coffee rested untouched on the table. Across from her, two members of hospital administration avoided eye contact. "We appreciate what you did," one of them said carefully, folding his hands, "but procedures were not followed." Claire nodded. She had expected this. "You engaged directly with an armed suspect," the woman beside him added. "You interfered with law enforcement negotiations." "I prevented a mass shooting," Claire replied, calm but firm. The man cleared his throat. "That's not for us to determine." A folder slid across the table toward her. "Temporary suspension, pending review, standard language, clean, bloodless." Claire stared at the paper for a long moment, then closed the folder without opening it. "So that's it," she said, not angry, just tired. "This isn't a punishment," the woman insisted. "It's precautionary." Claire almost smiled. She had heard that word before. Precautionary, the excuse used when truth made people uncomfortable. She stood slowly, testing her balance. "I understand," she said. "I always do." Outside the office, the hallway buzzed with quiet conversation. Nurses whispered as she passed. Some nodded. Some looked away, afraid association might cost them something too. Near the exit, Claire stopped. A familiar figure stood there, hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket. Her son. Ethan looked up when he saw her, eyes wide with relief. He crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her injury. "They said you got hurt," he murmured. "I'm okay," Claire said, closing her eyes as she hugged him back. Behind him stood her ex-husband, uncertain, humbled. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Claire rested her chin briefly on her son's head. Whatever she had lost inside that building, she realized, something far more important was standing right in front of her, and for the first time, the cost felt worth paying. The apartment felt smaller than Claire remembered, not because the walls had moved, but because life had changed inside them. Morning light spilled across the worn hardwood floor, catching dust in the air. Claire sat on the couch with her arm in a sling, listening to the quiet sounds of a city that never really slept. Ethan sat beside her, knees drawn up, scrolling absently on his phone. "They're letting me stay," he said finally, not looking up. "Dad already signed the papers." Claire turned to him slowly. "Are you sure that's what you want?" He nodded. "I am." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was careful. Like something healing. Across the room, her ex-husband stood near the window, hands clasped tightly together. He looked older than Claire remembered, smaller somehow. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I was wrong," he said, "about everything." Claire didn't answer right away. She watched Ethan instead, the way his shoulders relaxed just a little, as if hearing those words closed a door he'd been holding open for years. "I thought stability meant rules," her ex continued. "Schedules, predictability. I didn't see that what he needed was you." Claire met his eyes then. There was no anger left, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth arriving late. "You don't have to explain," she said. "What matters is what happens next." He nodded once. "I won't fight you." Later, after he left, Ethan leaned his head against her shoulder. "You scared me," he admitted, "when I heard about the hospital." "I scared myself too," Claire said softly. "Are you a hero now?" he asked, half smiling. Claire laughed quietly. "No." "Good," he said. "Heroes don't come home." That night, they ordered takeout and ate straight from the containers, legs tangled on the couch. Ethan talked about school, about friends, about things that mattered in a normal way. Claire listened, anchoring herself in the ordinary. When he finally fell asleep, Claire sat alone for a while, staring at the dark window. She hadn't gotten her job back. She hadn't gotten an apology from the system, but she had gotten her son. And as the city hummed outside, Claire realized that some things, once lost, could still find their way home. Claire returned to Harbor General 2 weeks later, not in uniform. She wore a simple jacket, her arms still stiff but healing, the familiar smell of antiseptic hitting her the moment she stepped through the doors. Conversation slowed as she passed. People noticed her now, not with awe, but with something closer to respect. Dr. Helen Royce was waiting near the nurses' station. "I'm glad you came," Helen said, her voice careful. "I didn't come for this," Claire replied. "I came to pick up my things." Helen nodded, then surprised her by extending a hand. "Then let me say this before you go." They stepped into an empty conference room. No administrators, no lawyers, just two women who had spent years on opposite sides of quiet battles. "I failed you," Helen said. "I chose safety over truth, and I let you pay for it." Claire studied her face. The apology wasn't polished. It wasn't defensive. It was heavy with regret. "You weren't the only one," Claire said, "but you're the first to say it out loud." Helen exhaled, shoulders sagging. "The board reviewed everything, not just that night. Your old reports, your evaluations. We were wrong." She slid a folder across the table. Inside wasn't a reinstatement notice. It was something else. A new role. Independent. Training staff to handle crisis de-escalation. No press. No speeches, just real authority, built into the system instead of buried under it. "This isn't a reward," Helen said quietly. "It's a correction." Claire closed the folder slowly. "I didn't want my old job back." "I know," Helen replied. "That's why this matters." Claire stood. "I'll think about it." That afternoon, she sat on a bench outside the hospital, watching ambulances come and go. Life moved forward, indifferent to heroes or villains. Miles O'Connor approached, 2 coffees in hand. "I hear you shook the building," he said lightly, offering one. "I tripped," Claire replied. "Hard." They sat in comfortable silence. "You staying?" he asked. Claire looked at the hospital, then at the city beyond it. "Yes," she said finally. "But on my terms." Miles smiled, not pushing further. As the sun dipped lower, Claire felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not victory, not closure, just the quiet relief of being seen and believed by the people who mattered. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, folded once, the paper worn thin like it had been handled too many times. Claire recognized the handwriting immediately. She sat at the small kitchen table, coffee cooling beside her, and waited a full minute before opening it. Some endings deserved patience. Evan Cross was being held at a federal medical facility, not a jail. The evaluation had taken weeks. PTSD, complicated grief, acute trauma layered on years of being ignored. The court had decided he would stand trial later, but for now, treatment came first. That alone felt like a quiet kind of justice. The letter was short. He wrote about the silence at night, about how hospitals looked different now when he dreamed, about how the sound of machines no longer made him run, but still made his chest ache. He did not ask for forgiveness. "I don't expect anything from you," he wrote. "I just needed you to know that I remember everything you said." Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the page. He wrote about Noah, about the way his son used to line up toy cars by color, about how he had hated broccoli but loved apples cut just right. Simple details, human ones, the kind that never made it into reports. "They took my anger away when they took my story," Evan wrote. "You gave it back without turning it into violence." Claire closed her eyes. "You didn't save me," the letter continued. "You saved what was left of me. That matters." At the bottom, there was no signature, just his name. Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with other things she couldn't throw away. Later that day, she read the news. Evan had entered a plea of responsibility, not innocence. He accepted what he had done without trying to rewrite it. The man who had fired the second gunshot had been identified, arrested, and tied directly to Halden's private security contracts. Truth, once loose, kept moving. That evening, Claire stood on her balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before her. Somewhere out there, Evan was alive, not free, not forgiven, but no longer erased. That felt right. Justice, she had learned, wasn't about perfect endings. It was about making sure pain didn't disappear into paperwork, and this time, it hadn't. The night shift began the same way it always did. Low lights, quiet footsteps, the steady hum of machines that never slept. Harbor General at 11:58 p.m. felt suspended between days, between endings and beginnings. Claire Whitmore adjusted her badge, slipped on her familiar navy scrubs, and stepped back into the emergency department. No announcement followed her. No one clapped. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She moved from bed to bed, checking vitals, speaking softly, noticing the things others missed, a tremor in a hand, a pause between breaths that lasted half a second too long. The small human signs that never showed up on charts. A new nurse watched her closely from the station. "You're really calm," the woman said finally, "after everything." Claire smiled faintly. "I've seen louder nights." Near the entrance, Miles O'Connor leaned against the wall, 2 paper cups of coffee in hand. He waited until she passed, then offered one without a word. No questions, no speeches, just presence. Claire took it. "You're off duty," she said. "So are you," he replied. "Technically." They shared a quiet look, something unspoken but understood. Not a promise, not a beginning that needed labeling. Just 2 people who had survived standing in the same space without fear. Down the hall, a child laughed suddenly, the sound light and unexpected. Claire paused, listening. Life went on. That was the point. At 2:17 a.m., an ambulance arrived. Another crisis, another chance to choose how the story ended. Claire walked toward it without hesitation. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't invisible either. She was a nurse who stayed when leaving would have been easier. A mother who came home. A woman who refused to let silence decide what mattered. As dawn approached, the city outside began to soften, light pushing gently against the dark. Claire stood at the window for a moment, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the skyline breathe. She thought of Noah, of Evan, of the names that would never be forgotten again. Then she turned back to her work, because the world didn't need her to be anything more than what she already was, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us at this moment, that tells me something important. Something in this journey touched you, maybe quietly, maybe deeply, maybe in a way you didn't expect. And now let's look at it together, not as a story, but as life. This story reminds us that real strength is not loud. It doesn't wear medals or demand applause. As the Stoics taught us, waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be one. Claire didn't win by anger or revenge. She won by choosing integrity when it cost her everything. Another Stoic truth says, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Healing begins the moment we stop letting injustice turn us into someone we're not. Life will test us unfairly. Systems will fail. People will disappoint us. But meaning is built in how we respond, not in what happens to us. Sometimes the reward is not success, but peace. Not victory, but connection. Not being remembered by the world, but being present for the people who matter. If this story spoke to you, please like it, share it with someone who might need it tonight, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive and reminds us we're not alone on this path.